Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to uncover the totally unfair biological reasons behind why chronic stress leads straight to binge eating and that really stubborn belly fat. If you've ever felt completely overpowered by cravings after a long, stressful day, well, you're absolutely going to want to pay close attention to the science we're unpacking today. Here's the roadmap for today. First, why we stress eat. Then, how cortisol attacks modern people. Third, the mechanism of visceral fat. After that, beating stress with gut health, the power of vitamin D. And finally, ultimate recovery through active rest. So, do you ever find yourself binge eating when you're super stressed out? It's a really familiar struggle for a lot of us, right? But here's the absolute most important thing you need to realize right off the bat. It is not a lack of willpower. Seriously. It's actually an ancient survival mechanism kicking in. And just realizing that, well, that's the first step to finally breaking the cycle. All right, part one. Why we stress eat. The evolutionary contrast. This really brilliantly illustrates the wild paradox we face today. Think about it for a second. When you face acute, sudden stress, like, say, a major test tomorrow, an intense presentation, or going back to our ancestors, running from a literal bear, your appetite actually drops. I mean, you definitely don't want to eat a sandwich when you're running for your life. But modern life, it's not a bear attack. It's chronic stress. It's endless work pressure, relationship issues, money worries. Because the stress literally never stops, it tricks your body into demanding energy for a never-ending threat. And that leads directly to increased appetite and binge eating. Moving on to part two, cortisol attacking modern people, the hormone of stress. Okay, so when you're endlessly worried, this biological mechanism called the HPA axis gets triggered. It goes like this. When your brain senses stress, the hypothalamus reacts instantly, releasing a hormone called CRH. That tells your pituitary gland to release ACTH, which finally signals your adrenal cortex to pump out cortisol. You can think of this whole chain reaction in your brain and glands as essentially an emergency first aid system. So what does this emergency hormone actually do to you? Well, cortisol has four main effects. First off, it spikes your blood sugar to give your muscles super quick energy to fight or flee. Second, it raises your blood pressure so you don't pass out during a crisis. Third, it temporarily suppresses your immune system to stop inflammation from injuries. And fourth, it drastically increases your appetite to replenish all that spent energy. Now, historically, this system would do its job and shut off quickly. But today, when this emergency system is basically left on constantly, it dangerously raises your risk for diabetes, hypertension, and infections, all while keeping your appetite unnaturally high. All right, on to part three, mechanism of visceral fat, the Daruma body shape. Now, here's the crucial point. It's all about how this continuous flow of cortisol dictates exactly what you crave and where your body ends up storing it. Under chronic stress, your brain subconsciously demands high energy, high fat, and high carb foods. We are talking the good stuff: cake, chocolate, potato chips, ice cream. Your brain literally thinks it needs massive amounts of dense calories to survive a grueling physical ordeal. And honestly, here is where it gets incredibly unfair. Fat cells actually have receptors that specifically bind to cortisol. And guess where the absolute highest concentration of these receptors is located? Yep, right in your visceral fat, wrapped around your internal organs. When cortisol binds to these receptors, it basically commands your body to aggressively store fat right in your belly. The result is this characteristic shape, often compared to a round Daruma doll, where a person gets a protruding, hard belly but keeps surprisingly thin arms and legs. It's so common, and it's driven entirely by this crazy stress hormone loop. Let's pivot to some solutions in part four. Beat stress with gut health. Chokatsu to the rescue. Look, since we can't exactly just eliminate our families, our demanding jobs, or our financial stressors, the absolute most effective biological hack we have is consistent chokatsu, which is just maintaining your gut health. By eating probiotics like lactic acid bacteria and bifidobacteria, you're doing something incredible. These good bacteria actually help regulate your HPA axis. They stop it from totally overreacting to your daily stressors. Plus, they produce these short-chain fatty acids that help prevent lifestyle diseases like diabetes. And considering a whopping 70% of your immune cells live right there in your gut, this is massive. Actually, clinical studies on stressed college students during exam week showed that taking these specific probiotics significantly reduced stress-induced stomach pain and discomfort. How cool is that? Which brings us to part five, the power of vitamin D, the HPA axis regulator.
Okay, this number is just staggering. Astonishingly, 98% of Japanese people are deficient in vitamin D. 98%. If your vitamin D levels are that low, your HPA axis, that stress response system we just talked about, it becomes super hyperreactive. Being deficient is just a massive disadvantage when you're trying to fight off chronic stress.
But fixing this deficiency has a fantastic twofold benefit. Taking a solid, substantial dose of vitamin D doesn't just normalize your stress response and calm down that HPA axis, it actually acts as a massive multiplier for your gut health, too. Studies show that proper vitamin D supplementation increases the diversity of your gut bacteria, specifically boosting those super helpful lactic acid and bifidobacteria we were just talking about. It's essentially a compounding effect for building up your stress resilience. And finally, part 6, ultimate recovery through active rest, flushing out the stress. Now, I know this sounds totally counterintuitive, right? When you finally finish work at 10 p.m., you are completely exhausted. Literally, all you want to do is grab a drink or just crash hard on the couch. But medical professionals absolutely swear by this concept called active rest. It's medically proven that doing some light exercise when you're mentally drained actually flushes the stress right out of your system beautifully. Just a quick 15 to 20-minute brisk walk around the block or a really short swim completely changes your physiology. You break a light sweat, the mental fog clears out, and you completely bypass that overwhelming urge to binge eat or pour a drink. So, we've explored the deep biological loop of cortisol, the real dangers of visceral fat, and the incredible power of gut health, vitamin D, and active rest. Now that you know your cravings aren't some sort of moral failure, but just an ancient evolutionary trick played by your hormones, I've got to ask you something. Tonight, when that familiar heavy wave of stress hits, are you going to reach for the cake, or will you go for a brisk 15-minute walk? The choice is entirely in your hands, and hey, now you've got the science to back it up. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep hacking those hormones.